So you've been learning English for years, and you've had some successes too, but you still can't find that key to really advanced English, the key that will stop you making mistakes like these. To reach this advanced English level, you need to learn the C1 English grammar rules. C1 is the level that describes advanced English. And in this video, I'm going to share 100 key rules that will take you up to the C1 level. We're going to look at these English grammar rules here and take them up to an advanced level. Let's start looking at C1 English grammar by studying the passive and using the verb get instead of the verb to be. My car was known to have a faulty gearbox, so it was fixed by the mechanics. Here we have the normal passive structure. The verb to be was, and then the past participle, known and fixed. Let's focus on the verb fixed first of all. Now, fixed is what we call a dynamic verb. When you fix something, something happens. There's an action, an activity. Can we use got instead of to be here? Well, the answer is yes, you can. With dynamic verbs in informal situations, you could use to get instead of to be. My car got fixed by the mechanics, and this helps emphasize the fact that an action happened to the car. But what about the verb known? Known is what we call a non-dynamic verb. Here, no action's happening, it's just a state. So can we say, the car got known to have a faulty gearbox? Well, the answer here is no, we can't, because we cannot use get with non-dynamic verbs, where there's not an activity or something explicitly happening to the subject. So to revise, you could use get to show that an action affected the subject, such as the car got hit by a motorbike, but we can only use states with the verb to be. We can use actions and states with the verb to be, but only actions with get. Now let's look at using it and there with the passive. In the picture, you can see someone's job application has been approved. I would like to inform you that your job application was successful. It's good news for many people. And here's some further explanation about this. It was decided that you were the best candidate for the vacancy. It was confirmed by the selection committee today. Both sentences use the passive form here. Notice it was decided. Was to be, decided past participle. It was confirmed. They both start with it, so you might expect that they work in exactly the same way. But they don't. One is called the predictive it and one is called the replacement it. You'll notice that the predictive it has a that clause afterwards, and you can actually delete that from this and still be grammatically correct. But the difference with the predictive it is that it here refers forwards in the sentence. It was decided, here it actually means you were the best candidate for the vacancy. It is pointing towards the information that comes next. But in the second example, where we don't use a that clause, it is looking backwards. It was confirmed by the selection committee today. Well, here, the it is a replacement for the information that came in the sentence before. So be careful. We use it with the passive form, but we use it in two different ways. When it's followed by a that clause, then the it looks forward to the that clause. When it's not followed by a that clause, it looks backwards to the noun or the information immediately before, as we do with it normally. Also, we can use there before a passive form. And this is interesting because there introduces what's called a split passive. Let's start with a typical passive sentence and then convert it so it starts with there. So many factors were considered before the final decision was made. So the passive form at the beginning of the sentence here is were considered. If we introduce there at the beginning of the sentence, look at what happens. There were, and many factors now gets put in between were and considered. And this is an example of using there with a split passive. There, the verb to be, then the subject, then the past participle, for exactly the same meaning. And we've got many more grammar rules to come in this video. But I also want to give you the opportunity to learn, use and practice these rules in a live classroom with me. In September this year, I'm starting live lessons that are just £2 per lesson, focusing just on C1 grammar. It's fully interactive with me as your teacher, live online. And if you can't make the lessons, you can watch the recordings to catch up. So if you need to reach this level, I highly recommend you join these classes. There's a link in the video description, so click on the link to find out more. Let's get back to the passive. And if you want to use the passive at a C1 level of English, you need to be able to use it with modals. Let's take a typical passive sentence and then add modals on. The door is opened by the caretaker. If we want to add a modal here, then we simply put the modal before the verb to be. The verb to be then stays the verb to be, it will never change, and then we have the past participle as usual. For instance, we may want to show that something is permissible, and in this case we could use modals such as may and could. The door may be opened. The door can be opened. Or another reason to use a modal is to show that something is advisory. The door should be opened. The door ought to be opened. We can also introduce modals here to give an obligatory meaning. The door must be opened, or the door has to be opened. Or perhaps we're predicting what comes next. The door will be opened, the door shall be opened. And finally, just to say that something is possible. The door can be opened, the door could be opened. So we can introduce modals into the passive if we want to put these extra meanings into the sentence. And now we're going to look at one of the most difficult grammar points to get right, and that's leaving words out. We're starting with relative pronouns. Relative pronouns can be left out of sentences like this one. We have a main noun, which is a grammar point, and then a relative clause that tells us more about that noun. The relative pronoun introduces the relative clause, which. The grammatical structure here is important before we know which words we can leave out. We have the subject of the relative clause, which is I. Then the verb is understood. But interestingly here, the object is actually the relative pronoun. And the relative pronoun describes a grammar point. The relative pronoun replaces the words that come immediately before. How do we know this? Well, let's think about what this clause really means. It means I never understood the grammar point before. So if we were to write this relative clause out as a sentence, we would take grammar point and we would put it in the object position. So we know here that which, the relative pronoun, is actually the object of the relative clause. So why is this important? Well, it affects the words that you can leave out. And rule number 1 for leaving words out with relative pronouns is when a relative clause defines the noun and the relative pronoun is the object, you can leave it out. So in our example sentence, it's a grammar point which I have never understood before. We can leave which out because it defines the noun and it's the object of the sentence. But it gets a little bit more tricky as we go along. Here's another sentence that's similar, but with a slight difference here. It's a grammar point which confuses everyone. Now here, we still have the same main noun and a relative clause afterwards, but some differences in the relative clause. Confuses is the verb. The subject this time is actually the relative pronoun which. And then everyone is the object. How do we know this? Well, again, let's imagine we're writing out the relative clause in full as a sentence on its own. It would mean this. The grammar point confuses everyone. So this time we borrow the main noun grammar point and it becomes the subject of our relative clause. There's no subject, no extra subject between which and the verb, you'll notice. So logically, which needs to be the grammatical subject of the relative clause. Why is this important? Well, it affects rule number 2. When a relative clause is in the simple aspect, so confuses is a simple present simple verb, and the relative pronoun is the subject, so which is the subject here, then do not leave out the relative pronoun. So we can't do this. It's a grammar point, confuses everyone. No, we need to keep the relative pronoun in because it's the subject of the relative clause. And the relative clause itself uses a simple tense verb. But there are always exceptions, and we'll come to that in rule number 5. Here's another example. It's a grammar point which is learned by all students. Here we have the same main noun again and a slightly different relative clause, but notice in the relative clause we have a passive form, is learnt, and this makes a difference later on. The subject again is which, and the actor of the sentence is by all students. Students are the ones who do the activity of the sentence. Remember, in the passive form it gets turned around. So the students do the learning, but students come at the end in the passive form. And this leads to rule number 3. When a relative clause has a passive verb and the relative pronoun is the subject, you can leave out the relative pronoun and the verb to be. So in our example sentence, we can leave out which and we can leave out is. And instead we can have, it's a grammar point learned by all students. Let's go on to rule number 4. Let's take this sentence here. What do you notice is different about this one? This is the girl who is studying the grammar rules. Again, main noun is the girl, and then a relative clause afterwards, who is studying the grammar rules. And this time we have the present continuous form, not the present simple. We have the verb to be followed by an ing form. The rest of the sentence is similar to what we had before. Who, the relative pronoun, is the subject, and the object is the grammar rules at the end. And this leads to rule number 4. When a relative clause is in the present continuous and the relative pronoun is the subject, you can again leave out the relative pronoun and to be. So in this sentence, we can say, the girl studying the grammar rules, instead of this is the girl who is studying the grammar rules. You can say either. Both are fine. Now remember, I said that we would return to rule number 2 about when the relative pronoun is a subject and we're using the simple form. Can these verbs change into the present participle in these sentences? The boy who finishes first will get a trophy. So who is the relative pronoun? It's the subject. Finishes is the verb in the present simple tense. The star that rises in the east is the brightest. The pigs that smell will be left in the barn. So that is a relative pronoun. Rises and smell are both in the present simple. The first one, yes you can. The boy finishing first will get a trophy is grammatically correct. The second one also. The star rising in the east is the brightest. But not the last one. The pig smelling will be left in the barn. No, we can't do that. Now, why? What's the difference? Well, this is the rule to follow. Rule number 5. When a relative clause is in the present simple, the verb represents an activity, and there is some sort of categorization, the relative pronoun can be omitted and the verb converted to the present participle. Now that seems quite lengthy, so let's break it down by using the first example here. Remember, our first example was the boy who finishes first will get a trophy. And yes, we can convert this by deleting who, the relative pronoun, and changing finishes into the present participle, finishing. It qualifies because finishes is the present simple. Finishes is also an activity. It's never a state. When you finish something, there's always an activity involved. And there's some sort of categorization. It's not just the boy who finishes. It's the boy who finishes first. First categorises the relative clause. It's the same in the second sentence. The star that rises in the east is the brightest. So rises, that's an activity that the star did. And in the east categorises where it rises. But in the last example, we don't have that. The pigs that smell will be left in the barn. Well, smell, in this case, is a state verb. There's no activity involved. The smell simply reaches our noses without us doing anything. And there's no categorisation. The pigs that smell, and there's nothing afterwards. It's just focusing on the verb itself. And in this kind of sentence, we cannot reduce in the same way. We have to keep to the original form, we keep the relative pronoun in, and we don't convert to the present participle. The next rules for leaving words out are a little bit more straightforward, but they're still considered advanced. First of all, leaving words out with to. When are you going to tidy your room? The parent says to the children in this photo. I'm going to, replies the child. Now, what does going to mean? Well, to actually means to tidy your room. And sometimes when we're answering after the preposition to, we can leave out the rest if it's clear from context. Here, it's obvious that it means I'm going to, and then do the things which you've just mentioned. Hopefully. We can also leave words out after do. I might go out later. Well, if you do, remember to lock the door when you leave. So here do means the activity in the first sentence. Go out later is replaced by do. And also with do so. Follow the rules. Those who do so will get a prize. And do so here means behave in this way. Which way? Follow the rules. It's referring back to an instruction before, and do so replaces it if you are going to behave in the way described with the information before. We can also leave words out in English in these situations. What can you see in the picture? In the picture on the left, you can see a lady cleaning the kitchen. And on the right, there's a man cleaning the bathroom. Let's use the example of the pictures to create some sentences where we leave words out after and. So let's imagine we start off with this sentence. He cleaned the kitchen and he cleaned the bathroom. We could also say he cleaned the kitchen and cleaned the bathroom. And we leave out the word he. Why? Because after and we have exactly the same grammar before and after. And where we have exactly the same grammar, we can sometimes leave bits out, starting with the subject. The second clause after and has the same subject as the first clause. But we can go further than this. We can say he cleaned the kitchen and the bathroom. Why? Because cleaned is shared by both clauses. We can also leave words out after but there's a difference here. He cleaned the kitchen, but he left the bathroom. With this sentence, we can leave out the subject because he is shared by both clauses, but we can't leave out the verb because the verb is different. Left is different to cleaned. It's similar with or. You must clean the kitchen or you must clean the bathroom. You can leave out you must from the second clause. You must clean the kitchen or clean the bathroom. And we can go further. We can leave out clean because it's shared by both clauses. You must clean the kitchen or the bathroom. You can't learn English for a long time without coming across modals. And to reach this advanced level of English, you need to know about past modals. They normally work in the same way. Modal, have, past participle. But there are some exceptions. First of all, let's consider a scenario where there is a thief who has taken money from a bank and now a detective is trying to work out what happened. And this detective uses logical deduction. The thief could have entered through the window. They might have got help from an employee. They may have had a key for the front door. But there are other thoughts that the detective has which are a little bit more certain. The thief must have been helped. No one could do it alone. The thief can't have accessed the safe. All the money is still there. And these are examples of past possibility using could, might and may, and then past certainty using must and can't. Notice that can't is negative past certainty, certainty that something is not true. Other ways of expressing modals in the past are for suitable actions that didn't happen, such as the police should have arrived sooner. This is where someone is looking back and they think of what would have been suitable, but it did not happen. It's kind of reminiscing. Also with could for past ability. The police could have stopped them. They had the ability in the past to stop them. Would is used for the hypothetical past. I would have helped, but I wasn't there. And here's the one that doesn't use have, followed by the past participle. I had to be somewhere else. This was a past requirement. And this goes with semi-modals, where we have a verb followed by to. In these cases, we can convert the verb into the past tense. Another feature of advanced English is knowing alternatives to modals. And we're going to look at alternatives when you want to express certainty with must. So a typical way of doing this could be, the story must be true. I'm certain that it's true. But we have some alternatives like these. Bound to. The story is bound to be true. This means certain or extremely likely. Also, has got to. The story has got to be true. And this means certain or necessary. But it's a little more informal because we're using the word got. Sure to. The story is sure to be true. This means guaranteed to be this way. Has to, without got, the story has to be true when you're certain and there's no alternative possible. Or can't, or cannot. The story can't be true, and this means certainly not. Now let's look at the phrases as much as and as little as, starting with as much as. There are two main reasons why we would use as much as. The first one is the most commonly known, which means the same amount. I like long videos as much as short videos. And because we're using the word much, there's an emphasis on being positive here. I like long videos. I like short videos. It's the same amount. But the second reason uses as much as in a slightly different way. As much as I like short videos, I prefer longer ones. So here, there is a difference between how much I like the short videos and the longer videos. I don't have the same feelings. The sentence works in a different way. As much as I like short videos, now here we're emphasizing a positive feeling towards what comes next. As much as I like them, then there is a difference in the second clause. In this example, I prefer longer ones means longer ones are even better for me than the shorter ones. Now, the second clause doesn't have to go in that positive direction. I could have said, as much as I like short videos, I'm not going to watch them anymore. So the second clause could have gone in a contrasting direction. There's an element of contrast with as much as. You state as much as to introduce a positive, and then the second clause goes in a slightly different direction, maybe a better direction, a worse direction, or just a different direction. So those are two uses of as much as. And if you put as much as at the beginning, then it creates that kind of linker of contrast feel. It may also surprise you to know that we can use much as without as in a similar way to mean even though. So much as I like entertaining videos, I prefer educational ones. So much as here works in a similar way to as much as when it goes at the beginning of the sentence and has that meaning of even though, like a linker of contrast. And we can also use as little as a linker of contrast that means even though, introducing something negative. As little as I like romantic films, I hate horror films even more. So by saying as little as, what I mean is that I don't like romantic films because I only like them a little amount. That introduces another clause that goes in a contrast again. Here the contrast is that we like horror films even less than the romantic films. But I could have gone in a different direction. As little as I like romantic films, I'm going to watch them anyway. Now you may think that as little as can be shortened to little as in the same way as much as, but you can't. We don't use little as in the same way as much as to create this linker of contrast. C1 English requires advanced knowledge of participle phrases. On the left, you can see a singer performing in front of an audience, and behind me here, someone has just received their exam results and they're being congratulated by their friends. Here's a couple of sentences that could describe them. The singer performed her most famous songs. This delighted the audience. She was delighted by her exam results, so she went to tell everyone the good news. Now in these examples we have two sentences, but can we do something with participle phrases to connect the sentences together and make a better connection between them? Let's start off with the first one and using a present participle, and here's an alternative. Delighting the audience, the singer performed her most famous songs. And this has exactly the same meaning as the two sentences above it. Here we're using a present participle, delighting, which is the verb delight with ing at the end, and then a noun on its own. It's a phrase. It doesn't have a verb that takes tense, and this is one of the features of a participle phrase. Present participles often indicate a simultaneous action or effect. And you can see this here. When does she delight the audience? It's at the same time as performing her most famous songs. So there is an effect of her performing her most famous songs on the audience. It delights them. The present participle doesn't alter for tense, so it didn't matter whether it was the singer performed, the singer performs, or the singer will be performing. Delighting will stay delighting in this position. And the subject is usually the same as in the main clause. There are some exceptions, but in general, the subject of the first clause, delighting the audience, is the same in the main clause. Who is delighting the audience? It's the singer, the same subject. What about the second example though? Well, in this case, we need a past participle. Here is the same sentence, but using a past participle instead. Delighted by her exam results, she went to tell everyone the good news. It's exactly the same, but here we simply have delighted. It's like a reduced passive form. Instead of she was delighted, we say delighted. So what do we know about past participle phrases? Well, they often link a result to its cause. So the result was she went to tell everyone the good news. That's what she did. But what caused that to happen? Well, what caused it to happen was that she was delighted by her exam results. That situation caused her to go and tell everyone the good news, the result of what happened. Again, it doesn't alter for tense. Delighted here does not mean the past simple. It would stay delighted whether the main clause was past, present or future. And again, the subject is usually, although not always, the same as in the main clause. And we have something called the perfect participle. For example, having finished painting the room, he sat down for a cup of tea. Now, this works in a slightly different way, because in time, one thing is leading to another here. So we use the perfect participle to tell us something done previously that affects or is connected with what comes in the main clause. He sat down for a cup of tea. What had happened immediately before? He finished painting the room. So having finished painting the room, that situation being completed, he felt he could move on to the next thing. Sat down for a cup of tea. We can also use participle phrases after conjunctions and prepositions. Let's set the scene. I arrived at the airport. I went to the check-in desk. 2 sentences, but we can combine them if we convert one of the sentences into a participle phrase. And we can do this with a preposition or a conjunction. Starting with after. After arriving, and we could say at the airport, I went to the check-in desk. After arriving simply means I went after. We could have said before. Before arriving at the airport, I went to the restaurant. And before arriving means I went before. Also, as. I saw my plane at the same time as arriving at the airport. So as is used when there are 2 things happening at the same time. When and while have the same meaning as. When arriving at the airport, I saw my plane. And that means I saw at the same time as arriving. Saw and arriving both happened at the same time. And on and upon. Upon arriving, I immediately went to the check-in desk. Upon arriving means the next thing I did comes after this. And since. Since arriving, I have checked in for my flight. Since arriving means between arriving and now. Linking different bits of what you say or what you write becomes more advanced at the C1 level. And we can do this with certain referents. Firstly, you have to have a good understanding of how to use it and this. Now, at a basic level, it and this can be divided as follows. We went into the woods. It was a dark place. We went into the woods. This hadn't been our plan. Do you notice the difference between it and this here? It refers to the previous noun, whereas this refers to the previous idea. It takes everything that's said before. But there's a little bit more to know at an advanced level. Look at this sentence here. There was heavy rain earlier. It didn't last long though. So it refers to heavy rain, but think about the time of the second sentence after it. It is at the same time as the heavy rain. So it keeps us in the situation of the previous sentence. It doesn't move us forward. Compare with this though. The forecast was a dry afternoon. This caused us to change our plans. Now this refers to the whole of the previous sentence, but notice a difference in tone in the second sentence. This caused us to change our plans because this has a transformative aspect to it. Here, this transforms the situation of the previous sentence. It introduces something that takes that situation forward. It leads to something else. Another advanced referent is when we use that and those, but within comparatives. The teachers compared the girls' results to those achieved by the boys. The lowest mark in the girls' group was 10% higher than that of the boys' group. What does those mean here? Those replaces results. What it means is the teachers compared the girls' results with the boys' results. But those replaces results and makes a tighter link. What about the second one? That here means lowest mark. The lowest mark in the girls' group was 10% higher than that of the boys' group. It means the lowest mark in the girls' group was 10% higher than the lowest mark in the boys' group. But that replaces the lowest mark. And those or that are often preceded by to or than, and sometimes that is followed by of. When you're using such properly, you're at an advanced level, and this is such when it's a referent. For instance here, The school received a 100% pass rate in exams. Such results are unusual. Or, the school was accused of cheating, but no such thing happened. What does such mean in each case? Well, such refers back to the highlighted part. A 100 pass rate in exams. It saves us repeating the same thing. And such really means this type. This type of result. A really high level result. Perhaps not exactly the same words, but the type of information that's being described in those words. In the negative form, we can put no in front of such. So the school was accused of cheating, but no such thing happened. Such here means anything like cheating. Nothing like that happened. A feature of advanced English is being able to use inversion, and we can do that in conditional sentences. Let's build some context. Look at the picture. What do you think of this hotel room? Would you like to stay in it? Here are some sentences people might say or think. If you don't like your room, we'll give you another. Perhaps that's the receptionist. If we went to a better hotel, we would be happier. If we had liked our room, we would have stayed longer. So the blue represents first conditional, the red represents second conditional, and the green represents third conditional. But we can use inversion with different words in each case. First of all, using should. Instead of saying, if you don't like your room, you could say, should you not like your room? Not shouldn't you like your room, but should you not like your room? We'll give you another. It has the same meaning, it's a little bit more formal, and we invert the subject and should here. That's how we would convert the first conditional. With the second conditional, we can use were to. Were we to go to a better hotel, we would be happier. It means the same, but were and the subject have been inverted. If you want to make it negative, add not after to. Were we to not go? And for the third conditional, you can use had. Had we liked our room, we would have stayed longer. So had comes before the subject. And to make this negative, had we not liked. Now for negative inversion. It's wonderful when you win something, isn't it? People give you applause. You can win a trophy. Let's look at how we can use negative inversion to describe those feelings, starting with never have. A typical sentence to describe it when you're feeling really good could be, I haven't felt this good before. But another grammatical way of expressing this is, never have I felt this good. Here, notice we've started with the negative word at the beginning. Then we have the auxiliary have, then the subject, and then the main verb felt. And this impact of putting the negative word first and inverting the auxiliary and the subject brings extra emphasis to what comes afterwards. I haven't felt this good before. Never have I felt this good. It's a situation that has not happened in my life, and I want to emphasize that fact. You could also use little did. I didn't think it would go so well. We could change this with negative inversion to little did I think it would go so well. We have the same principle again. We have a negative word, little, then we have the auxiliary, did, then the subject after the auxiliary, I, and then the main verb, think. Also with not only, but a slight complication here. So let's start with a typical sentence. I won first prize and I also won second prize. What a wonderful day. Let's use negative inversion with not only. Not only did I win first prize, but I also won second prize. So in the first clause, we have our typical negative inversion structure. Negative word not, but here it's two words, not only. Then we have the auxiliary before the subject, did I, then the main verb win. But in the second clause, to introduce the second factor, the factor that carries on from the first, perhaps the factor which is even more of a surprise, we introduce that with but, then subject, then also. But I also won second prize. And this is a very common English structure when two things happen that you want to emphasize or make an exclamation about. It could be two negative things, it could be two positive things, and the second one is perhaps even greater than the first. Not only did I win first prize, but I also won second prize. Who would have thought I would win two prizes? Sometimes we can simply use these adverbs on their own. Rarely, seldom, barely. There's a few others as well. So I don't usually win anything. Rarely do I win anything. So rarely becomes the negative word because rarely emphasizes a negative amount. I don't usually win anything could also become seldom. Do I win anything? Similar to rarely. Seldom is a negative word, so start with that. Or I found out just after I got home. Barely had I got home when I found out. Another way of using negative inversion is starting with a preposition followed by no. At no point did I expect to receive a prize. So preposition at, then no, and then the information that follows the preposition. At no point did I expect to receive a prize. Under no circumstances did I think I would win. So under is the preposition, no, then the information that follows the preposition, then the auxiliary followed by the subject in the inverted way that we've learned before. And one more, using only followed by a time word. So if we start off with, I won't believe it until I receive the trophy, we could use only here. Only when I receive the trophy will I believe it. So only emphasizes that there is a condition upon me believing. But notice we've inverted will I again here. Only when I receive the trophy will I believe it. So the inversion happens in the second clause here. At a C1 level, you also need to be aware that there are different grammatical structures when you use reporting verbs. The most common is probably verb followed by that, and many reporting verbs can use this structure. So examples could be, he stated that, or she suggested that, followed by the clause that comes after that. After that, where the dots are, simply add in what the person said or what the person found out. Another structure is verb followed by just a noun or a noun phrase. They considered the evidence. So considered is the reporting verb. The evidence is the noun here. Or reporters warned the police. Other verbs that follow this pattern include ordered, advise, invite, remind, and tell. They all can be followed by a noun immediately afterwards. Another pattern is verb followed by to, followed by the infinitive. I promised to return. She refused to see me. Other verbs following this pattern include agree, demand, offer, and threaten. Also, verbs can be followed by the ing form. I admit speaking to him. I suggest following them. Notice here we've repeated suggest. Suggest can be followed by a that clause, or it can be followed by the ing form of a verb. Other verbs that can be followed by another verb with ing are recommend, deny, mention, and as we've seen, suggest. Other verbs are followed by a preposition and then ing, and often they have a specific preposition that comes afterwards. I apologised for my lateness. He complained about the food. Apologise for, complained about. But also confess to, warn against, insist on, object to. And finally, we have verbs that can be followed by an object. and then a that clause, or to plus infinitive. We persuaded them to stop. Other verbs that work like this are tell, advise, warn, pressure, and get. Now, by the time you've reached a C1 level, you're probably familiar with the first, second, and third conditional. But now it's time to become confident in mixing it up, using different tenses for different conditionals. The first type is where we mix the first and the second conditional. We have if followed by the past simple, then a clause with will, instead of if followed by the present simple. Look at this example here. If the chicks hatched last night, we will be able to see them today. So imagine that you have some chickens. The chickens are sitting on some eggs and we're waiting to see if they hatch. But we don't know if they've hatched, perhaps because we've not looked inside the farmyard yet. So we're kind of speculating here. So why do we use the past simple here? Well, what this means is we have an unknown past situation. And if the unknown past situation is a certain way, then that leads to a present or future consequence. So it would still be appropriate here to use will in the second clause because will indicates a present or future consequence. What does it depend on? It depends on something that has already happened, but we simply don't know about it. So we use the past simple for this particular use. Also, we can mix the second and third conditional in different ways. Look at the example first. If I had gone on holiday yesterday, I would be at the beach now. What's the structure here? Well, we have if and the past perfect in the first clause. If I had gone on holiday yesterday, this is the third conditional. And then we have would be. So would followed by an infinitive is the second conditional. Why do we mix this up in this way? It's because we use the unreal past situation, which if that had been true or satisfied, that would lead to a present situation, a present reality. Normally with the third conditional we have a past unreal idea leading to a past consequence, but what if the past idea, if it was fulfilled, led to a present consequence? And here we have that mixing of the third conditional with the second conditional. And we could also mix the second and third conditional in the other direction as well. Consider this example. If I kept more money for savings, I would have taken you on a holiday this year. Here we have if followed by the past simple, which is like the second conditional, but would have and the past participle for the second clause, which is like the third conditional. The first clause is indicating a general truth. The person is stating about their behaviour with savings in general. If I kept more money for savings. Now, because it's second conditional, it's hypothetical here. The person doesn't have money from savings. They're imagining if they did. But if that had been true in the past or present or future, then that would affect the outcome both now and in the future, but it could possibly have affected something in the past too. I would have taken you on holiday perhaps earlier this year. When I say this year here, I mean before now. How can I talk about the past in this situation? Well, it's because the savings are likely to apply to the past as much as to now. So if I kept more savings in my account generally, I mean last year I had savings, this year I had savings, next year as a habit I had savings in my account. I kept savings in my account. Then that could have had a consequence for the past, the present and the future. And if I'm just referring to the past consequence here, then I can use the third conditional. I would have taken you on holiday this year. So this mixing of conditionals involves an unreal general situation and how it affects past reality. There are some unusual verbs in English which can be followed by either a gerund or an infinitive, but the meaning changes when it happens, and you need to know how. First of all, let's look at the infinitives on the left. I stopped to talk, I remembered to talk, I forgot to talk to her, I tried to persuade him, I went on to win. Compare that with the meanings when we have the gerund following instead. So I stopped talking means the talking stopped, whereas I stopped to talk, to plus infinitive, means the talking started, something else stopped. I stopped what I was doing before and now I talk. But I stopped talking means the talking stopped. I remember to talk means remember in the present. I remember talking means you remember something about the past. Forgot is similar to remember. I forgot to talk to her means I forgot in the present to do this. I forgot talking to her means I think about the past, but I forgot that particular incident. I tried to persuade him means I made an effort to persuade him that failed. But I tried texting him is more of an experiment. Maybe you tried other things, they didn't work, so you tried one more thing as an experiment. And I went on to win. This means I won after this time, but I went on winning means you were winning before and you just carried on winning. And other verbs that change meaning in this way are need, mean, prefer, and regret. They all have different meanings or uses when they're followed by to plus infinitive as opposed to when they're followed by the gerund. At an advanced level of English, you need to know about cleft sentences. What do I mean by a cleft sentence? Well, first of all, look at what's happening in the pictures here. We've got some sweets and someone whose hand is out to take them. This person knows the truth. I stole some sweets from the cupboard, but I'm pretending I didn't. But now they've been confronted and they have to admit. The truth is that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. Now this includes a cleft sentence, which is the, noun, is and that. It's a short clause that goes at the beginning of the sentence to add extra information, in other words telling us it's the truth, or it draws more attention to the sentence as a whole. The truth is that this. So I'm creating more emphasis on the sentence by preparing you for a particular aspect I want you to focus on. Cleft sentences can be achieved in other ways too. A WH word followed by a verb is and that. What happened is that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. Now is of course represents the verb to be, so it could change depending upon the person who's speaking. It could be are, or whether it's past or present. It could be were or was. Also, WH word followed by a subject verb, then to be and that. What I know is that someone stole sweets from the cupboard. There is can introduce a cleft sentence. There is truth in the story that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. Note that they all include that, but informally we could drop that, like we did with the relative clauses. And it is. It is true that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. At a C1 level of English, you also need to know which state verbs can also be active. Starting with the verb to be. Now, normally the verb to be is a state verb. Often it introduces something that describes the subject. The boy was naughty. Naughty describes the subject. But we can make this active if we're focusing on the behaviour someone is doing at a particular time. So he was being naughty. Here, was being is to be in the continuous active form. And this refers to one incident of being naughty at a particular time. Another verb that works like this is the verb to have. The girl has long hair. Here, this shows possession. The long hair belongs to the girl. But we can make this active if we mean the experience someone has at a particular time. She was having fun. That was the experience she had at the time. A lot of verbs to do with our senses can be state and active. Usually they're state, such as we saw the moon. But this could be active if we're talking about a meeting or a relationship. We were seeing friends. That doesn't mean we actually see them with our eyes. That means we meet them. And another verb that works this way is the verb appear. The traffic appeared to move. This again is what we sense through looking. And in this case, it's a state verb. But look at Taylor Swift on the right. Taylor Swift is appearing in London. Now, this doesn't mean that you see her in the distance. This means a notification of a future appearance. Now, you probably didn't expect to see the present simple on this video, but there are some aspects which belong to the C1 grammar category. What's happened to this car? Well, when this happens, there's often a headline in the newspaper. The situation is this. The story is a car overturned on the motorway this morning. But if I put it into a headline in a newspaper, they would say this: car overturns on motorway. Now, why did they use overturns? Notice that's the present simple for a past event. It's because when we shorten it and write in note form and turn it into a headline, often we'll turn it into the present simple to do that. In a similar way, if we summarise a long piece of fiction for someone, we'll often do it with the present simple. So if someone asks you about this picture here, what happens in the story, and maybe there's a book with 100 pages, but you want to summarise it. When you summarise it, you'll probably switch into the present simple. A boy gets lost in a forest and his family go on a great adventure to find him. I've summarised the main plot of the story for you, but I've used the present simple to do it. And another use is for official arrangements. The CEO of a major company is to open a new store today. And by using is to, I'm showing that this is something formal and official and planned in the very near future. Have you found this useful? It'll be even more useful to learn some of these grammar points in lessons. And I have live English lessons coming up in September. They focus purely on C1 grammar. I'll teach you the points and then I'll give you the opportunity to practice with other students. It's fully interactive with me as your teacher live online. And if you can't make the lessons, you can watch the recordings to catch up. You can book this course now. There's a link in the video description below me.